and then questions. So just type in your questions anytime you've got them. So all yours, Jon.
Thanks for the intro, Scott. And I'm excited to be here again, doing another Rockin' Relationships webinar. So for the past, it's been over a year, I've been going through the Gottman's research and kind of presenting different parts of that. And I'm going to depart from that. We may come back to it a little bit later, but I'm going to depart from that to spend a little time talking about a dynamic that I see in relationships that often leads to those situations where we're really not talking about the same thing. We're missing each other, but we think we're talking about the same thing. So it gets really, really frustrated. So we're going to talk about truth and fact, and the place that truth and fact have in especially addiction recovery with couples. So first, let's define our terms. Fact is verifiable pieces of information. So for example, how much you have in your bank account, that's a fact. There's one answer to it, we can verify it. There's not nuance there. Have you ever eaten pizza? That's a verifiable fact. It's a simple yes or no. How many other people have you acted out with? That's another fact question. Now, fact plays a really important role in recovery because without fact, we don't come out of denial. We don't get the full glimpse of how out of control we've been. The other side of this, or the other part of this, is what I would call truth. Truth has to do with emotional fidelity. So it's not just about what happened, verifiable facts. It's beyond fact, and it connects with a larger theme and less concrete information. So for example, are you financially secure? That's more of a truth type question with a truth type answer, as opposed to the what's in your bank account. I've worked with plenty of people over the years who have more money in their bank account than I'll probably see in my entire life, and they would not say that they're financially secure. So we can see that truth is not always related to fact. It's, again, that more emotional base. Do you like pizza? That is not a simple yes or no. If you were to ask me, I would say it depends on where it comes from, and whether they have good crust or not. Were you out of control in your acting out is another one of those fact-based or truth-based questions. The reason why I'm talking about this today is this year alone, I've facilitated 6 full disclosures with couples so far, and I'm working with others to get ready for that. And I see a lot in both in the person preparing for the disclosure and the person preparing to receive the disclosure, there can be a lot of stress around what information am I going to get, and am I going to get the truth? I think it's important to break that down and to look at the facts that I need. What are the facts that I need? If you've acted out with somebody else, I need to know that. If your acting out has involved minors or children, I need to know that. There's the facts part of the disclosure. The part of the disclosure, the part of that truth-telling ritual that I see really making the bigger difference for couples is, can we get truth in the disclosure? Can we get into those bigger emotional pictures, those places where it's less concrete, so there's more nuance, but there's more truth there. So I'm thinking of just about everybody that I've prepared a full disclosure with, when they really get into the facts and they get that mode of information giving down, they usually get into a bigger truth. And that truth may be, my gosh, I was so out of control. Or I can't believe how much I didn't see that. Or, and even I think larger and more helpful truth in relationships, I've really had an impact on the people that I care about, and I didn't realize that before. That impact can be really hard to quantify, but it's so, so important for that individual to be able to understand, and for the person receiving the disclosure to be able to know that that person understands that truth, that impact. So let's talk a little bit about why we need facts in relationships. And I hope as you're listening to this and you're applying to yourself, you're not trying to decide, well, what's more important, fact or truth? They're both important. I just want to highlight that they get different parts of the job done. And this is where I see in relationships, we miss each other a lot. Sometimes we need a conversation about truth and we need to connect on truth. And we try to make it about facts, which are not the same as truth. So why we need facts in a relationship. Imagine a job interview and an offer that was based on how you'll feel. So if somebody said, oh, don't worry about the salary, don't worry about the hours, you're going to love working here. It's a great place to work. Everybody loves it. How confident would you be in making a choice to accept that job offer? You need some facts about it so that you can plan the rest of your life around it. Maybe I'll love working there, but maybe I never get to leave the place and I have to say goodbye to friends and family and other opportunities in life. Facts establish boundaries and they start to create some safety. So when I'm working with couples where there's been betrayal, knowing whether or not acting out has happened with another person, if the receiving party wants to know that, is very, very, I would say it's essential in being able to establish safety and boundaries going forward. I need to know where you've been. I need to know what I'm up against. I need to know if my health is in danger. I need to know if you're acting out can include other people, because maybe there's a world of difference to me between you using pornography and masturbating compulsively and you going and seeking out other partners. I need to know what's going on here. Facts can uncomplicate issues. So in my work with couples, oftentimes when I see couples get kind of mired in this fact and truth, we don't quite know what we're looking for, what we're talking about, I'll often ask a really pointed question like, so-and-so, do you want to work through this? So-and-so, do you want to be in this relationship? So-and-so, do you want to proceed with recovery as it's outlined for you? That can get us out of the ambivalence, on Tuesdays it feels this way, but Fridays it feels more this way, and it's a simple, straightforward answer. It can cut through a lot of complication. Now let's talk a little bit about why truth is needed in our relationships. What's not easily obtained in the facts is more nuanced, and therefore it's more truth-based. Just getting facts from somebody may not provide a level of safety. Imagine hearing from your partner who's acted out a very dry retelling of the facts, and there's no connection with truth, no connection with I've done damage to me, I've done damage to you, I've hurt our relationship. Do you want to be in that kind of relationship where it's just about the dry facts? I'll tell you, my work as a marriage therapist, some of the hardest couples that I work with are couples that don't want to deal with the nuance of truth and the emotion of truth, and they just want to deal in cold, hard facts. They're hard to work with because there is no middle ground. There is no compromise when it's just fact, or there is no appreciation or room for nuance and human experience in fact, which, last time I checked, every couple I work with is a couple of humans trying to make it work. And humans are not, we're not machines, we're not input output creatures at all. There's a lot that happens in between the input and the output. Truth can connect us to a larger picture that may take some time to fully reveal. So one of the truths that I think can yield a lot of fruit, however, it's completely unsatisfying in the moment, is the truth of, I don't really know how I feel about that, or I don't know what's going on for me. I recently facilitated a disclosure where the spouse, in some of their specific questions, wanted to know about, do you know why you've been acting out? Do you know what caused this? And the most truthful answer he could give was, I have some theories, but I ultimately don't know right now. That hasn't become clear to me. I'm working on that. And he was really nervous about giving that answer in the disclosure. She later stated it was one of the most grounding parts of the disclosure for her, because she could feel that that was true. She could feel that he wasn't trying to tell her what she wanted to hear, what he thought was the right answer, but he was giving her a real clear glimpse of where he was at. Truth allows for human development and emotional evolution and ultimately change. So if you look at, again, kind of a fact-based approach to recovery, to say with one person, I've done all of these, terrible betraying things in my addiction, and they've caused a lot of damage. The fact is those things happened. The truth might include there were some reasons why that happened, and as those reasons and underlying issues are addressed, real change can happen, and we can get to a point in life where it's not likely that happens again. There can actually be change. I think that change is more of a truth-based thing. Fact is more mired in what has been the history. And that's a tightrope that I see a lot of spouses have to walk, is between the truth and the fact. The fact is my spouse betrayed me in these ways. The truth is I really feel like something is starting to change, and it gives me hope. Hope is another one of those things that I think is truth-based, not fact-based. And hope is definitely needed in a long-term recovery process. And I would say in the day-to-day operation of any relationship, when we can hope for the best, or we can hope for the best that our partner is capable of, we can really, I think, give some room and some latitude and have some bandwidth in a relationship that allows for some of the bumps and bruises along the way. Now, when we confuse fact and truth, so I want you to think through some conversations that you've had with a partner or someone in a relationship with recently, where it's devolved into it's just simple, tell me yes or no. That's a sign that we're confusing fact with truth. And we have to be able to stop and determine, first of all, what is actually being asked here. Are they asking for my feelings on this, my perspective, my nuanced truth, or do they want the facts of what's happened? Second of all, are the facts enough to explain everything, to give the full context, or are there facts and is there truth? Many couples argue over facts when they can't abide the truth and its implications. So I am working with a couple right now who they'll get into a lot of fact arguments about who said what and when they said it and who did what and why they did it. And the truth that I'm working with them on recognizing is neither of them know if they want to stay together. They've been together for 25 years, and there's some aspects of their life that they really love together, but they're not sure if they love each other. And as with many difficult truths, one day it's in their heads, and I know that they're looking at that, oh my gosh, this scares me, or this is sad that we don't have the commitment that we'd hoped we'd have, or our relationship isn't what we want it to be. And when they come back the next week, it's like it's out the other ear and we're arguing about facts again. So when you get into those fact arguments, ask yourself, is there a larger truth here that's really hard for me to see and accept? In essence, I think sometimes we use facts to twist our partner's arm into a truth that we would rather accept, rather than taking them in their truth as it is. We may want the facts, like I said, to support a different truth. And so be really careful, or just watch for when you're using fact. Also watch for when you're using truth to avoid the fact. So I've asked you how many partners you've acted out with. Oh, I was just really out of control. I can tell that there were so many people. No, I need to know how many. We can cross the threshold into each in order to avoid the other. Fact and truth together, I think, bring more of a fullness of reality to the relationship. And reality is where health is, especially relational health. So a couple of suggestions for ways to, if you're listening to your partner and you're getting into that gridlock, sometimes we have to listen to the words that our partner is speaking, not the tone that they're speaking it in. That's getting at fact. So when I'm working with couples and there's a really heated issue, oftentimes I hear the partner speaking fact to each other. I feel this way, I need this, but it comes out with a lot of venom. It comes out with a lot of hurt. It comes out with a lot of urgency. And as human beings, we're much more emotionally based than we are like factually based. So if you hear that tone, it can totally obscure what's trying to be communicated through that tone. So oftentimes I'll work with couples and I'll say, I want you to pause here, take a deep breath, and see if you can just listen to the words, see if you can set this tone aside. And in those cases where a partner is trying to communicate fact, and their partner can tune out the tone and they can say, okay, this is what I heard. Yes, now you're understanding me. You're finally understanding me. The converse can also be helped. Sometimes we need to hear the tone and not the words. If your partner is saying to you, I'm fine, through sobs, and they can barely get the words out, I'm fine, there's probably a bigger truth there that's important to pay attention to. So there are times where we have to pull back from the words, because the words might be, they might be offered to us to provide some comfort or to de-escalate or to make everything okay. We may have to pull back from the words, the fact that's being presented there. We may have to get into the bigger emotional truth. And getting into that truth requires us to be curious, to ask questions, and to create space that allows the people that we're in a relationship with to really be where they're at versus where we want them to be. When fact and truth converge, we have a reality that's really powerful. And that's often one of the questions that I'll ask the couples that I work with: how committed are you guys to the reality that you live in? Because without honoring and respecting the reality as it is now, meaningful change isn't possible. It's like trying to get to Chicago from wherever you're at, but not knowing where you're at. Or, for me, I don't know why I'm thinking Chicago. It's about a 24-hour drive. It's about a 2-day thing. If I want that drive to happen overnight, I will be sorely disappointed and underprepared, because there's not an acceptance of the reality of where I'm starting. And in relationships, it's the same thing. The reality of where a relationship is may be devastating. It may be really painful. But without a full acceptance of where you're starting, you'll never get where you want to go. So that is fact and truth. And I'd encourage you to spend some time thinking about it and maybe try some of those strategies for pulling in and out of fact and truth and seeing what you can gather from honoring both of those.
Thank you, Jon. That is fascinating. That was just like fascinating. Thank you. I had so many thoughts. It kind of strikes me that truth might be facts filtered through me as a person. You use the phrase human experience, and then we get to the truth. So there's facts run through me, and then we get the truth out the other side. Is that kind of how you see it, or am I simplifying? Or
Yeah. And I would say, just because the facts are filtered through me and they become truth there, it doesn't mean that it's any less important. I think filters are just as important to know about as the facts are. They tell just as much of the story. So again, it really, whether you're going for fact or truth, it really depends on the kind of information that you need and the kind of information that's useful. But I think that's a really good way of conceptualizing truth. It's facts that have gone through the filter of me.
yeah, and the other thing, I sort of, I'm a math, logic, science guy. So I wrote fact plus truth equals reality, and then equals a chance for change.
Yeah.
And it just reminded me so much of step one for an addict, which is, my life is a mess, basically. It's admitting reality. And sometimes people talk about we have to surrender to win in recovery. And that doesn't make sense until you think about surrendering as, I'm not surrendering to my addiction. I'm not giving up to the addiction. I'm giving up to reality. I'm surrendering and accepting my reality, which is I'm an addict. And now I make a change. And applying that to a relationship just makes perfect sense. We're surrendering to the reality of our situation. Now we can make the changes we need to make. And that's going to be a combination of facts plus truth, because they're both really important. This is so fascinating. I've never heard this distinction, and I love it. Thank you. So, okay, we have some questions. Let's jump into them. I will be doing my full disclosure next week. A polygraph will be administered. I'm also bipolar and alcoholic. I had a span of 6 years of acting out against my wife of 19 years. I want to be truthful and factual, but honestly can't remember exact details of dates, times, location, names, etc. How can we both benefit from the best facts and truth I provide? Interesting question.
Yeah, really good question. The first thing I think is to understand what polygraphs do and what they don't do. So we call polygraphs lie detectors, which is that's not quite accurate. They're a fidelity polygraph, which is what's used in disclosure versus a criminal polygraph. It is a deception detector. So what it's looking for is knowing that you're deceiving and not providing the information. Polygraphs cannot detect repressed information or information that you really didn't encode. If you say, I don't remember how many partners that I had, and you know, and you do know how many partners you had, that will likely come up as there's deception here. So when I'm working with folks on their disclosure, sometimes the best they can do, and it really requires a lot of homework. I remember one guy, he was so dissociated through a lot of his acting out, but he had email accounts, and he had text records, and he had financial records, and he poured over those, and he basically had to reverse engineer timelines based on the clues he was getting from that. And even then, there were some areas around like dates, locations, times. He said, to the best of my recollection, or the nearest I can estimate is between this time and this time, we met somewhere in this area, and that was really the best he could do. But my job as his therapist was to really challenge that and to make sure that it wasn't just on first glance. And oftentimes what I'll see with guys on first glance is they'll either write nothing or they'll fabricate information to try to give this pinpointed stuff. And it really has to be more about the fact and the truth together. So the facts that I have is I know between these time periods I acted out. The truth might be I don't remember exactly how I acted out, but it was probably this, and this, and probably this kind of frequency based on what I know about my patterns and what I can guess about that time. So polygraph and disclosure itself does not provide a historically accurate, high fidelity accounting of everything that happened. It more gets at this relational truth where both of us are committed to, when it's working, both of us are committed to working this through. We're committed to a culture of honesty and transparency in our relationship. I once had a guy who, he took his polygraph a day or two before the disclosure, and he passed the fidelity polygraph. And right after the disclosure, his wife could, based on what she knew and timelines she knew about, she knew there were discrepancies in his disclosure, and there was actually a significant portion of acting out that he didn't include in the disclosure. And her question was, how could he pass? This man was highly dissociated, and so the version of him that took the polygraph wasn't the version of him that did the acting out. And it was later, as he recognized and as she probed with some of those questions, that the memories came back. And what he got from the disclosure process is, I tell the truth when I have it. I tell the truth because my spouse is asking for it. And so he turned right back around into, all right, you're right. There is a discrepancy here. Now I'm remembering what came in this. Here it is. And he gave that to her quickly. That could have been a disaster had he held back and tried to deny it. But he got what I think is the spirit of disclosure, which is moving from a culture of secrecy to a culture of honesty and truth. And he gave that quickly. So, do the very best you can. If you don't remember, or the best you can do is estimates, make sure that you're clear about that. And really challenge yourself to hold nothing back.
But don't try to pretend you don't remember when you really do, because that will bite you in the rear end. The
truth will always out. So don't practice deception.
But it's not, John, it's not really unusual, is it, for somebody to give a full disclosure and to really think that's everything, I got it all out. And then 3 months later, it's like they hear somebody in group or in a 12-step meeting sharing about something, and they're like, oh my God, I forgot that. Yeah. And then they have to go back and amend the disclosure, basically.
Yeah. And what I've seen, as long as that's the exception, not the rule, I've seen in couples that can actually be part of trust rebuilding. when I know, I let you know because that's what you've asked for. And it's really following through on that commitment to provide truth, to provide honesty.
So, okay, let's move on to the next question here. How can you tell the difference between fact and feelings? As a partner, I will tell my husband how I feel, and he will feel guilt, and he will feel guilt and shame, and come up with a distorted scenario as to why I said something. He won't acknowledge what I say. He will accuse me of trying to make him feel guilty.
Yeah, another really interesting question. For me, feelings are more along the line of truth. Feelings are not things that we need to justify, explain, or provide evidence as to why they exist. They just exist. And sharing feelings is really, it really gets at something different than sharing the facts about what's happened. And what you're describing here, I think, is a really normal interchange. Sometimes when I share a harder truth with you, some harder feelings, if you're in a reasonably grounded, regulated relational moment, and I share about some pain that I'm in, you might feel some guilt and you might feel some shame because you may recognize you had a part to play in that. Or it may be as simple as when your partner is suffering that doesn't feel good to you. That may be a moment of truth. Back when, feels like she's been around forever. Back when Brene Brown was becoming big, I could always tell when the guys that I work with discovered Brene Brown because we would inevitably be in a conversation, in a session, and I would give some pointed feedback, or kind of a challenge. And if he wasn't in a grounded recovery place, he'd say, "Don't shame me." I'm not shaming. That's not what's going on here. You're feeling shame based on what we're talking about, but I'm not giving that to you. That's a moment of truth when we can both look at the reality, whether that reality comes through my feelings or it comes through your behavior. And reality doesn't always feel good. That's why we have so many ways of escaping it as human beings. But in those moments where hard feelings are shared and maybe some guilt or shame comes up, that may be part of the truth of that, is there is a part of me that does feel awful, or I'm embarrassed, or I can't believe that I did this. And the trick is in those moments is to stay with the reality instead of trying to twist it or bend it so that you can justify your way out of feeling those uncomfortable feelings. What I see in couples who can sit with each other through those uncomfortable feelings is there's some trust built. When we move it away from a fix it model in a relationship to a witness it model in a relationship, if you can't have fix it, I know a lot of couples who are very, very happy with witness it, because it's the best we can do.
So I've been trying to think of a scenario. So let's say we've got a husband and wife, and there's a history of betrayal or abandonment, in the relationship and in previous relationships as well. So there's a long history of this, and he's been playing video games for the last 6 hours, and she wants some attention, and she says, I'm feeling abandoned right now, or whatever. Can you parse like the facts and versus the truth in that situation for us?
Yeah, so that's an instance where this is ripe for both of you taking up camps in fact and truth. In this scenario, I imagine the person who's been playing video games, they will camp out in fact. The whole rest of the week, I've been attentive. This is the first time I've taken for myself. Yeah, it's been all day, but I don't do this often. And the partner who's feeling abandoned will say things like, you abandoned me, you do this all the time. Why can't you pay attention to me? Why can't you be here? That's the truth. There's a larger emotional truth. And like you said, Scott, some of the background is, this is a couple in recovery. The larger truth may be, I expect to be abandoned by you. I expect you not to be here. And the larger truth may be your last few months of good behavior and presence that still may not be enough to kind of turn that internal clock for me where I say, yep, I can rely on you more than I can't. Because that's a process. So when I work with couples in those scenarios, I'll usually say to the video game playing partner, I want you to pause the whole what happened, because you guys could argue about that all day long. What's the larger story that your partner's telling you here? And if I can get that listening party, that video game playing party grounded enough, usually they'll say, I can see why in this moment they would feel this way. There's a history of that. I want some credit for what I've been putting in the bank account. But I understand that that's not enough to turn the tide. And usually there will be a concession on the other side. Yeah, I have noticed there is a difference. It's hard for me when you're not here. Now you have a couple talking reality. Sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that. The larger truth is we're still pretty insecure with each other. We're still, looking over our shoulder, waiting for the next shoe to fall. And there's that witnessing moment again. That couple able to both say, we're scared of what's coming next because we're extending a lot of trust to each other. I'm trusting that you will see me in the work that I'm doing and give me the benefit of the doubt every now and then. And you're trusting me to not hurt you again. This is a huge thing that we're extending to each other.
Yeah, and combining the facts plus the truth gets them into the reality, and then they can do something about it. If they're just fighting about facts and truth, they can't really make changes, can they?
Yeah. And what I've noticed here is usually if both parties in the coupleship are not bought into this, fact is king. If there's one party that is, usually that person struggles a little more with emotion. Either it's overwhelming for them or they don't feel like it's valid, they're hyperlogical. Sometimes they're on the developmental delay spectrum, like what we used to call autism disorder, things like that. And the good news is you don't have to natively be an emotional person to understand larger truth. It's like anything else in a relationship, it's a skill base and you can learn how to do it. There's a couple of guys that I work with right now that almost verbatim in their intakes, they said, emotions just aren't interesting to me or they're not useful. So I don't want to do any of that emotional stuff. And in those sessions, I kind of sit back and we've turned the tide a bit and they're actually very
you do the therapist thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We've turned the tide quite a bit and they're much more emotionally connected and they're actually finding a vibrant life there. And as opposed to where they were at a couple years ago, now they actually protest their spouse when they're saying, hey, there's emotional disconnect. I need this. Usually when somebody takes the stance of there's no place for emotion, I find that that's not usually a measured, thought out stance. It's more of a stance of fear. I don't want to get into the emotion. It's too overwhelming for me. I don't know what I'm doing there, but you can always learn. And same thing when it comes to fact. A lot of Marsha Linehan talks about this in dialectical behavior therapy. There's emotion mind and there's logic mind, and they actually overlap. And in the middle of that Venn diagram, she calls it wise mind. It's the same idea that both are actually needed and we can learn how to lean into the one or the other that we're not as comfortable with, and we can get to a fuller picture. We don't have to be afraid of one or the other.
Yeah, Rob and I were talking a little bit, Dr. Rob and I, in his webinar last night about emotional intelligence, which is a lot of the same thing. You got feelings over here on the scale and sort of your logic and, rational thoughts over here. And we got to find the balance of, facts versus truth, I guess. I'm loving the facts and truth thing. Okay, next one here. How do you know when to rely on words versus when to rely on tone? Great question. I've been lied to and gaslighted so much that I can't tell whether his words are true, and I can't read his body language either to help me decide.
So what I would suggest here is an experiment. Sit back and take one pass through the information. Okay, I'm going to hear the words and then reflect back to your partner. This is what I'm hearing you say. And check that out. Is that what you're intending to say? Is the message hitting home? And then take another pass through on, I'm going with the tone, not the words. So not based on what you're saying, but based on how you're saying it, it seems like you're frustrated. Or it seems like you're anxious, or it seems like you're overwhelmed. Is there some truth to that? Does that feel accurate to you? Because that being able to really gauge reality, it has less to do with what your partner is offering, although that's an important piece, and it's more to do with whether your internal meter of, is this lining up, does it make sense, whether that's working. I'm in the middle of a book. It's pretty dry research, but it's fascinating stuff. It's called Duped. Truth Default Theory and the Social Science of Lying and Deception by Timothy Levine. And he talks about in here how we like to believe that there are telltale signs for somebody lying and deceiving. As he's gone through the research and conducted research of his own, there are no reliable telltale signs whether somebody's lying or not. He says the best tool you have in your toolbox to determine whether someone's telling you the truth is whether or not it makes sense. And so asking those questions from different angles, thinking within yourself from different angles, is what's being presented to me. Does it fit? Does it make sense? That's the best path you have to determine whether or not your partner is being truthful and upfront with you. And if your partner's not being truthful and with you, you have a right to protest that. Hey, this isn't gelling with me. This isn't making sense. Help me understand. I think is a really good soft startup to the I need more information here. So yeah, try it out. Run an experiment on both ends. Check with your partner. Are you calibrating? And that can start to tell you whether or not it's the tone that your partner is trying to get across, or the words that they're trying to get across.
Yeah, maybe you can explain a little bit about gaslighting too, just for people who don't know, because it sort of takes a lot of that natural intuition away from you. You've been gaslighted, so it's really hard, and you may have to run it by your friends and your support network too.
Yeah, so that gaslighting, it's an intentional deception designed to throw somebody off of the truth, to make them doubt their own reality. I think most of us are born with a lot of confidence in the reality that we see, and that can either get enhanced through life, or it can kind of be knocked out of us in life. So those other people, other sources, other supports to calibrate with, that can be an important part of this too. So you may run that experiment in talking with your spouse, and then you may go to your sponsor or your support person and say, okay, here's the data that I'm getting. You know my story, you know bigger than this. What am I missing? Help me out here. What are you feeling? Especially in recovery early on, I think it's way too high risk, and I wouldn't recommend couples calibrating to each other. Because by and large, those couples are part of a system that wants to maintain the system no matter the cost. So if the way we maintain the system is we just both don't live in truth, we'll do that. If we really want to build a healthy system, we need some support, we need some help from outside. So rather than relying solely on your partner to calibrate to, you calibrate to people on the outside, and you bring that back to your partner in a marriage therapy session or in a recovering couples group, and you keep working on that calibration back and forth, allowing the support of a larger community to support the health of your relationship. So that's a fantastic suggestion, Scott, of reaching out to other people and calibrating there too.
Yeah, and particularly people who know. I mean, I grew up with a mother who did not, and still does not, live in reality. She gaslights herself, basically. She lives in the world she wants to live in. And she has memories of my childhood that are very different than the memories I have. And I always think, I was there. That's not what happened. So sometimes I will pick up the phone and call my sister and go, okay, I was on the phone with mom, or we were out to dinner with people, and she told this story about my childhood that wasn't true, or at least that I don't remember. What is your recollection? I run the truth past my sister, who was also there most of the time, and get at least truth. It may not be fact, but it'll at least be truth, how she feels about it. And it's, I have to do that sometimes just to ground myself, and so that I don't lose trust in my own ability to remember reality as I perceive it anyway. And I perceive reality, two people can go through the same exact thing at the same time, you know, side by side, and remember the reality of it very differently. I mean that's just the way it is. But anyway,
I
yeah.
was in a meeting last night with the local chapter of the NAACP, and we were some teachers from the school district had come. These were social studies teachers, and they were talking about how in the state of Utah there's a shift from a knowledge-based curriculum to a competency-based curriculum in social studies. So they were saying this is an opportunity for some of these minority voices, because before we had here's the curriculum, this is all you teach, and now teachers can teach whatever they want, and they have to be able to produce competencies like being able to read charts and graphs and maps and whatever. And this history teacher, this K through 12 history teacher, brought up a really good point. He said, I could go to a family gathering, I have a large family, and they usually end in fights. He said, if we each went home and wrote in our journals about what happened, to a historian in the future, those would all be primary source documents because we were all there. However, what we record in our journals is not going to be the same information. And he said, so really, even when we have primary sources, do we know exactly what happened in history? And he said, very rarely. That's why it's important to get so many voices from many different angles, because that gives that fuller picture. And that's what a support community can do, as you're working on kind of coming out of the gaslighting and reestablishing your confidence in your own perspective. You do need a lot of different points of input.
Yeah, thank you. That was the point I was awkwardly trying to make. Thank you for clarifying. That makes much more sense. Okay, next one. We're working toward full disclosure. My partner is very defensive and blaming, but continues to show up to therapy with the sex addiction therapist. One, is his defensiveness and blaming attitude indicative that he's still acting out? And two, if he is, can the therapy be successful, or does he have to be sober for it to work?
So this all hinges on the definition of acting out. Man, I feel like a lawyer some days. But this is actually, I think, important to note in healing from sex addiction. To be sober from sex addiction is not the same as emotional sobriety, or arresting what Stan Tatkin would call acting out in the relationship. So defensiveness and blaming are not always indications that there is sexual acting out going on or addictive acting out going on, although they are acting out against a relationship. They are acting out against a system. I'll often hear from the men that I work with in recovery, about the first year and a half, they're saying, I couldn't be more different, and their spouse is saying nothing has changed. Part of that is because it's a night and day difference to live sexually sober. It's a whole other mountain to climb to become emotionally competent and capable in a relationship. And most spouses that I work with, it's the emotional competence and the emotional presence that really turn the tide for them, really make the difference for them. And that's one of the reasons why recovery from sex addiction is such a long-term thing, because it doesn't stop at getting sober. You can be, how does Carver Brown refer to them? The sober weirdos. You can be a sober weirdo and have impeccable sexual sobriety and still be like nobody that anyone wants to be in a relationship with. And that isn't, go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, in AA, the term is dry drunk. I'm not drinking, but I'm still an asshole. You know, there's a lot more work to be done. And, you know, alcohol, drugs, sex, it's all the same. Stopping the behavior is first and foremost. Changing my thinking patterns and how I relate to others is down the line.
And to me, that's what therapy is. So this question, can therapy be successful, or does he have to be sober to work? 12-step groups and support groups are really great for getting people sober, and they do all the time. Sex addiction healing is really about repairing attachment ruptures and almost resetting the attachment system so that person has a shot at secure attachment. That's the work of therapy. And that work cannot happen, just like you can't get sexually sober if you still are acting out. You can't get emotionally sober if you still don't know how to regulate your emotions, be responsible in relationships, and understand what's going on inside of you when you're interacting with another person. Now, the question here starts with full disclosure. Sobriety is not a condition for full disclosure. There are some circumstances where I would say it's kind of an emergent situation where disclosure needs to happen. And the disclosing party does not have to be sober. They just have to be committed to telling the truth. They have to be committed to giving the facts. And that's something that hopefully you're both working with a competent, trained therapist who can kind of weigh that. For me, when I do disclosure with clients, I've had very few situations where it's been an emergency situation, like you're acting out with other people and you're putting your spouse at risk for infection. That would be an emergency disclosure type situation. Most of the time, I don't put somebody in a position to give disclosure if they are defensive and not moving towards emotional sobriety as a rule. They need to go into the disclosure room resonating with, I've done damage and I at least need to start seeing it from that angle, not just from the defensive, don't be mad at me angle, but I really need to start considering my impact on my partner.
Yeah, the defensiveness and the blaming is ingrained habitually as the addiction was, because they're, in some sense, they're part of the addiction. They're part of the denial. They're part of the lies that I tell myself to make my behavior okay.
Yeah.
And, when I'm focusing on just stopping the behavior, I'm not yet focusing on, unwinding all of the denial and all of the behaviors that spring from that, like defensiveness and blaming. So it's not indicative that he's still acting out. He might be, he might not be, hopefully not. And if he's still going to the sex addiction therapist and is working toward full disclosure, I think those are good signs that he's at least attempting to move in the right direction. And also addiction recovery, it's 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back. You think you got it and then you don't got it. And then, it's just, it's push pull and I'm speaking from the addict's perspective. And it's a long slog. There's a reading in AA says, we'll meet you as we trudge the road of happy destiny. And everybody sort of, complains about the word trudge in this official reading in a 12-step program. But, trudge is just kind of a slow walk, and it's a slow walk.
Yeah, and that's really where I think truth and fact together play an important role. When you say it's 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back, sometimes it's 3 or 4 steps back.
Yeah.
And as long as we can come to the starting place of truth and fact, that's the process that eventually brings complete healing. Those are 2, I think, guideposts for complete healing that you can't do without. I often say to addicts that I'm working with, if you're not good at it already, you're going to get good at saying, you're right, I missed that, and I'm sorry. Because you
and meaning
can't,
it when you say it.
Yeah, and meaning it, you can't rely on your own perception because it has been distorted for a really long time, and you may not even be able to tell when you're lying. And that's that I need people outside of me to help me establish truth and fact and help me ground in that.
I spent the first 2 or 3 years of my recovery saying, I'd say something and then I go, no, wait, I'm sorry. That is not true. I don't know why I lied. That's, I'm really working on this, and then I would say the truth is, and I had to do that over, and it was embarrassing. I think I just got embarrassed and ashamed enough about it that I finally got better at just telling the truth, but it took so long because it was, I had been lying since I was 12 years old about all kinds of things, and, trying to, basically what I was doing was I was covering up the shame I had about who I am as a person, or who I think I am as a person, and the behaviors I was engaging in. And even when those behaviors stopped, I still had lots of shame about me as a person. And most of the lies I told after I got sober were about making myself look good or seem better off, or, or more knowledgeable. It was humbling and enlightening to go through that process. But I think people really appreciate when I would say, no, wait, that's not true. I'm sorry. Don't know why I said that. And I think betrayed partners, if a cheating partner can learn to do that, particularly with a betrayed partner, it is appreciated. Oh my God, I just lied to you. I'm so sorry. You know, not that anybody wants to be lied to, but at least you correct it quickly.
For the situation as it stands there, I'm in that process of changing. I've seen for a lot of partners, when they know that their partner knows that they're doing it or that they can self-monitor, that is a huge step forward, I think, in some safety, because now it's less required that I'm hyper-vigilant and checking everything out, because I can see that you have a monitoring system in place, or you're getting a monitoring system in place.
Yeah, you're working
so that you're going to be less prone to self-deception.
Yeah, self-deception is the big key with addicts. I mean, we lie to ourselves most of all. We lie to ourselves more than we lie to you. We do. And we believe our lies. And that's why we expect you to believe them. Follow-up question about recognizing deception. If my spouse is displaying the same behaviors, same body language, same tone as when I knew that he was lying, is that an accurate sensor that I can lean on now to detect deception?
To detect deception, probably not. And I'll explain that a little more, but to detect that something's off, absolutely. There is a range of behaviors that we engage in when we're reasonably grounded and present. And if you're looking from a neurobiological perspective, what makes this relationship works is that we are both reasonably able to relax in each other's presence, so that we're not either zoning out or we're not in fight or flight with each other. A really interesting book on this, Malcolm Gladwell, it's his latest book called Talking to Strangers. And I forget the name of the murder case. I remember some of the details. I think it was an American woman, and she was study abroad in Italy, and her roommate was murdered in this really grotesque, awful fashion. And the police brought her to the scene of the crime. And the reason why they arrested her and why they eventually put her on trial, even though there wasn't a shred of evidence that she had committed the murder, was that when they brought her to the murder scene, she was acting weird. Like there wasn't a lot of tears, there wasn't a lot of shock. And they took this as, well, she's seen this before, she must be guilty. In the trial, it bore out that there wasn't any evidence connecting to her to the murder. In fact, there was evidence that connected somebody else to the murder. And the prosecuting team had a hard time shifting their focus to the actual murder because she acted so odd. And the author said, imagine yourself in her position. You were plucked out of the blue from what you were doing in this beautiful foreign country, and you were brought to a murder scene, and you see your roommate's dead body. Like, would you be a little out of sorts? Would you maybe be frozen a little bit? So those physiological cues by themselves do not tell the full story. They do tell a story, and they tell that something's wrong. And here's where, with a partner, this is really good fodder for a marital session. Hey, I've noticed this has been going on for you. Can you tell me what's happening? My worst fear is that you're lying to me again. You're deceiving me, because this is what it looked like before. Help me understand. And I say in a marital session, because if you have a good trained therapist, they'll help your partner find grounding first, and then be able to talk from that emotional truth. What is going on for me? I wish that there were some accurate go-tos, and you could Google, and you could probably find books that will tell you if this is happening, this kind of acting out is happening. In my opinion, from the research I've done, that's pseudoscience at best. I wish there were some real telltale signs where you knew exactly what was going on based on what you're seeing, if your partner's being opaque or not transparent. But you can always know that something's off when the person that you're interacting with is not grounded. And that's, again, part of that bigger relational truth. We may not know the facts about what's going on, and the facts might be irrelevant. It may be more about this truth of, I'm not at ease with you. Or I'm fearful maybe I'm thinking about work all the time and I'm worried I'm going to fail there. Or maybe I'm thinking about the what ifs in our future. There is something off. I would just be very cautious about going down the road of trying to figure out what is off without involving your partner in some way and helping you discover that.
Yeah, I mean, the partner here could be telling the truth and really actively working to tell the truth, but is not yet working on changing tone and body language, and because it just hasn't, we haven't progressed that far in the recovery, or could still be lying too. Let me ask you, Jon. We have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to ask. I always feel like when somebody's lying to me, I get a physiological reaction. People would call it a gut reaction, and I tend to trust that, but it's more of a trust but verify.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what we're dealing with here? Maybe trust your gut reaction, but verify, dig a little deeper, find some other feedback.
Yes. Those gut reactions, I think if we really listen to what they're about and look at it physiologically, they're almost always a slow down and be careful here. That's what it's telling us. Although oftentimes when we get that kind of gut reaction, rather than slow down, we just want to speed up and get through it because it's so uncomfortable. So I get that same feeling. And oftentimes the way I'll translate that is, I don't think you're telling me the truth. I think the way to be effective with that is to slow down. And again, like the most effective tool we have for detecting deception or detecting a lie is whether or not what we're being told actually makes sense. And sometimes we have to leave the primary data source, that person, because in gaslighting, you can spin a very effective story and you have to talk to somebody else who's outside of the situation and also more grounded in reality. And let me just run this by you. Does this make sense? And get that kind of help. But that gut feeling, I think, is always the place to start with.
Thank you. Thank you, Jon. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to actually listen to the first chunk of this again when we get it posted online, because I want to reinforce my truth versus fact bit. Great topic. Jon will be back in 2 weeks. Anything you want to say to take us out?
Thanks everybody for coming, and as always, go experiment with this. I would be thrilled to hear in a couple weeks what you've been thinking about and what you've been practicing with truth and fact.
Cool. All right. Thank you. We'll see you in 2 weeks, everybody.
Bye.